Welcome everyone. This is series 3 of 5. Super excited. It's beliefs and how they are formed and the power they have over you. And again, we've got Nathan here all the way from Dublin. Nathan Hawken, thank you so much for joining me again. Let's get
As always,
started.
Diary. My pleasure. Yeah, let's jump into it because I've been itching to talk about this.
It's an awesome subject, very powerful. So I'll let you get started.
Yeah, of course. Okay, cool. So I think the best way to begin is with something pretty huge, and that is that beliefs are one of those things which dictate pretty much every decision and every action that we make based on the decisions that we make as well. So no matter what you're doing throughout your life, in any context, it's all down to beliefs and what's going on inside your head
Yeah.
first, which is really, I find fascinating. And this is something that, as through my own development, my own progress, but more so in my own, when I've been doing coaching with my clients, I try and find somewhere else to take them, but it always boils down to the beliefs. And the problem always is that we're not consciously aware of our belief patterns. Some of them maybe yes, but most of them are so deep inside our unconscious that it takes a lot of work just to uncover what they really are. And that's when, if you ever hear someone talk about like a deep coaching experience or a realization or a breakthrough they had, that's because they finally got themselves down to a point where they could uncover the real problem of what's going on inside them. Because it's not about the things that they're doing, like they may be doing a particular behavior that they don't like, but it's not about the behavior. Like, you don't change the behavior, you need to change the underlying problem, which is the belief. And once you change that, then the behaviors start to change as well. So it is a huge topic, and I know in a short time we're going to be able to speak about it. It's going to have a lot of potential, and it can be quite powerful to help people start to realize what's going on inside their own head. But it does take a little bit of work to really start to change them if you're ready for that change as well.
And I think too, that's really important that you say, because we do only have, around about an hour, and that's nowhere near enough time because it's such a huge thing. So where do you know that beliefs are formed? Like, where does this start?
Well, that's such a cool question. And so there was a guy named Morris Massey, and he actually he came to understand where these beliefs are formed. But what he really understood was that there's 3 development stages in every human being. And now at the very beginning of it is the ages between 0 and 7. Now this is called the imprint stage. The imprint stage is essentially where the beliefs are formed, which I'll get back to in a second there. After the imprint stage, from the ages of about 8 to 14 years old, that's what's known as the modeling stage. And so the modeling stage is where you look around at people you admire, heroes, people around you, and you start modeling their behavior based on what you think is good and what you'd want to replicate in your own life. And then after that, from the ages of about 14 to 21 is called the socialization stage. And that's where we form our peer groups and we start to become more socialized in life in general. But going back to the imprint stage, so the imprint stage is the ages between 0 and 7. Now, this is the stage where we, as children, babies in particular, we're sponges. We're really absorbing everything that's around us. And what that also means is that we're absorbing beliefs that people have around us as well. We're absorbing a lot of the things that we're told, which start forming the beliefs. And it can be very small things which happen, but the way a particular belief starts to get formed is when something happens. It's what's called a significant emotional event. Something that is significant enough within inside ourselves that creates an emotion, or an emotion comes from it. Now, it could be a good positive emotion like happiness, joy, things like that, or it could be a negative emotion like anger or sadness or fear, hurt and guilt. Now, these are the ones that we're going to mainly talk about here, because when we talk about beliefs, the positive ones that we have are amazing and they're helping us and serving us already, but it's the negative ones and the ones that are limiting, which are stopping us from doing the things we want. And so during that imprint stage, something will happen. It'll be a significant emotional event, and it could be something quite small, but it's enough to produce that emotion that comes out. And so, to put a great example that I usually use anytime I'm trying to educate people on this is, like, as a child, you might drop something, right? You may spill a glass of milk or something and it breaks to the floor, and there's a parent or someone around you who reacts in a way that says something to you. They may say, "Oh, you fool," or "What'd you do that for?" Or they may just act in a way that creates this response. And so inside the child, that could bring out a fear, because they may suddenly be afraid because they made this mistake, or they may suddenly be sad because they feel bad about dropping it. So what happens from there is that emotion comes up, and then suddenly a small belief starts to form around it, like I'm clumsy, or I'm no good, or I always make mistakes, something like that. Now, this, of course, is happening unconsciously. So it's not like it's in their conscious awareness, because between the ages of 0 and 7, we don't even know that we've got a conscious and unconscious, right? Unless we've watched Pinocchio, but even then we still don't quite grasp the concept. But at the unconscious level, this is all happening. And this is where like a belief starts to get formed. Now, when it comes up once and that emotional response happened once, look, that's fine. But once that's there, that's the beginning of the belief. And so if it's a belief like, I always make mistakes, as they go through life, or as we go through life, something else will happen. Another significant emotional event will happen, which will trigger that same type of emotion, which then amplifies the belief or gives it more solidity, and it makes it just stay much deeper within inside us. And as that happens through life, the more it happens, an event is caused, an emotional response is caused, that belief gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And so next thing you know, you're 20 years old, 30 years old, 40, 50, 60, or even 70 years old if you've never done anything about it before. And you've always had this belief like, I always make mistakes. I always make mistakes. So anytime you make a mistake, you say, of course, I always make mistakes. Of course, I made another mistake. It's what I do, you know? And so you've believed this your whole life. And as a result, because of this belief, the actions that you take are dictated by that. So if you always know you're going to make
and your
and your language, of course, yeah, because this is all happening internally. So yeah, you make a mistake, you're like, of course. So what do you think that does to you every time you give that more power? It makes you feel
reinforcement.
worse. That's right.
Total
Absolute reinforcement. Yeah. And so if you're always going to be believing that, the actions that you're taking are going to be dictated by that, which means if you're always going to make a mistake, well, if I'm always going to make a mistake, why would I try to do anything new? Why would I push myself to get outside of my comfort zone? Why would I start a business, even though I've got a really good idea for one, or there's work that I do, which I love to do, and I'd love to get paid for it? Well, I'm always going to make a mistake. So that means I'm always going to make a mistake in my business, or I'm always going to make a mistake with a client. So why would I even try? And you'll notice this, and there's probably people listening now, which can definitely resonate with it, because they may be feeling stuck in a job they don't like. They may be working for someone that they don't like working for, and they might just be generally unhappy without really realizing why that is. But they may want more, but every time they feel like they want to go for more, the reinforcement of that belief comes into it. It's like, well, why would you go for more if you're always going to make a mistake? Because you're going to make a mistake there, and you're going to probably screw that up as well. So let's just keep doing what you're doing. Your happiness is irrelevant.
And I hope I'm not jumping ahead here, but that's that limiting belief, isn't it? That limiting belief has been created.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That is absolutely the limiting belief. And it seems so simple, because even when you say it out loud, you're like, that's such a silly thing to believe. But this is what a lot of people believe, whether it's, I always make mistakes, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, or a big one is, I can never make the money I want to make. All right. I can never have the things I want to have. That's such a silly thing to think, because we know that we can pretty much create anything that we want in our life if we're prepared to make some changes and start doing the work. But if you take that back, those beliefs form at such a very young age, sometimes even before that. But I think for the sake of our podcast, getting into like pre-birth beliefs coming into it, maybe that's huge for some people. But if that belief about I can never make enough money is formed, then how can you possibly ever get in a position where you're going to be financially successful? One of the examples that I know Tad James shares, because that's one of the guys that I learned my NLP from, was that he had a client come to him, and he had a belief that same thing, he can never make the money. No, it wasn't that never make the money he wants. It was that money destroys relationships, right? Money's a bad thing. It destroys relationships, right?
Yeah.
So if you've got a belief like that, he had a belief like that. So he was stuck in his job and he wasn't making the money he wanted to make. Doing a process of timeline therapy, which is incredible. And it's what I use with most of my clients anytime I need to help them shift their belief. Ted James took him back along his timeline to find out the root cause of that belief. And it turns out it was formed inside his mother's womb. And it's like he was overhearing what his mother was watching on TV about a broken relationship due to money, right? So it wasn't even a real thing that had happened, but he had overheard that with inside the womb, and that started the belief, which then got reinforced with everything he did in his life. And then next thing you know, he was 40, 45 years old, feeling stuck, unhappy, not making the money he wanted to make because of this belief that was formed unconsciously at a very, very, very early age. It's incredible, isn't it?
Oh, like, and I actually just thought about many years ago, I was actually volunteering to teach men at a homeless shelter down in Goulburn in New South Wales. And I heard their limiting beliefs coming up, like I was in there teaching them financial literacy and goal setting and how to use basics in computers because they needed all those skills to go back out into the community once they left the homeless shelter. Anyway, I heard these limiting beliefs coming up, and I'm like, okay, how can I reach them? And it was as simple as me saying, okay, guys, when do you think I left school? Because it was all about, we can't learn this because we didn't finish high school or we didn't do this. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was able to get around them and say, okay, well, what year do you think I went to school? Did I go to high school, college, university? You tell me what you think. Oh, you would have gone to university. They said you would have done this. And I said, okay, so let me tell you something. I didn't finish year 9 of high school. I had babies very young. And then as my babies were growing, I worked really hard on myself, doing the work to be able to now do what I do, running my business, still raising children, completing qualifications myself, but I didn't finish high school. And that changed everything for them because
Yeah.
they could resonate with something instead of thinking that they're not smart enough or they're too old for something, which was their limiting belief. They went, oh, well, maybe it's possible. And that's what
Yeah.
I love, is opening up the possibility can, change that belief.
Well, that's what it's all about. It's about creating new options for people. If
Mm.
anyone feels like they can't do something, or I know when a coaching client comes to me, they feel like they're stuck. And this is the place where most people become, is they feel like they've got no other options, right? And
Yeah.
when you feel like you've got no options, then of course nothing's ever going to change. The whole idea through coaching or therapy, or even just a general conversation with someone, is to help them see something else, reframe their situation so they're open to more possibilities. But what's interesting, like, because we've spoken about like the responsibility and actually getting to a point where you want to make that change.
Mm.
But I think it's important for people to really understand is that they dismiss the opportunity or a new option too quickly. It's like the example you just gave. It's like, well, you must have gone to university. So already they're closing themselves off. The limiting belief is you have to finish school, or you have to be educated. You have to get to a certain point of education in order to create that. But most people tend to just dismiss that or dismiss themselves way too quickly. So
Yeah.
if you ever hear someone talking about not being happy in their job or their life or whatever it is, and then you suggest something to them like, well, why don't you go for a new job? First thing they say is, no, I can't do that because, and I'll give
Mm.
you all the reasons why that is. And so
And use the word, I'm stuck. No, I'm
yeah,
stuck here.
yeah, I'm sorry, I've got to do this. I've got bills to pay. If I
Yeah.
leave my job, what does that mean? All these things come up because the beliefs are there talking about, it could be anything. Most of the time, when you dig deep enough, it'll be something along the lines of, I'm not good enough to be able to get a new job, or
Mm.
I'm not worth getting another job. Because there is that emotion which is underneath it, particularly when you start talking about these type of beliefs. Fear is a huge contributing factor to it as well, because
Yeah.
that fear of the unknown as well. It's like, well, this is comfortable now. This job I'm in is comfortable now. If I go for another job, what does that mean? What if it doesn't work out? What if I can't get another one? What if I can't get my other job back? So it could be fear of the unknown. It could be even fear of success. If I
Mm.
become successful, will I change? Because you hear so many stories about people changing once they have money or once they become successful. The question always there is, well, did they actually change, or did they become who they really were and they were limiting themselves before? It just turns out that maybe their values weren't really aligned with with money and things like that. But you'll notice that people dismiss themselves so quickly, no matter what type of good advice you can give them. If they're not
Mm.
ready to hear it, they won't listen. And this is what I've noticed, particularly in when I choose to coach people or not, or when I choose to open my mouth or when I don't. Because I know some people just don't want to hear it, particularly if I've offered some really good advice or a good suggestion and they give
Yeah.
me all the reasons why they can't do it. Someone who's not quite ready just yet. And that's perfectly fine. They've got to get to a stage of, I guess, awareness to open up enough to be open to more possibilities. But we have to just realize that we do dismiss ourselves so quickly, and we're so quick to shoot ourselves down from opportunity. And this is
Mhm.
where the acknowledgement comes in. And I think, because
Yeah.
I think one of the questions you'll probably ask is how do you actually do it? You do it by acknowledging it, realizing the time when that comes up, and when you're like, you know what, I'm limiting myself. Why couldn't I get a new job? And then you have to start asking the questions. What do I believe about myself, or what's going on here? Why am I so quick to not even
Mm.
give myself the opportunity? Because the answers always come.
Yeah, so I had two questions for you. What I use the acronym for fear all the time. I use it in nearly every time I'm coaching or when I'm teaching. And so for those of you who are listening, which is the false evidence appearing real, I use
Yeah.
that acronym, and it's very powerful. And many people have that aha moment. So one of my questions for you, which you've covered, but I really want people to hear this. Can you change beliefs if they don't feel right?
If they don't feel right.
Mm. So, I have this belief, I could have this belief around something because that's what my family believed, but something
Ah,
inside me said that wasn't right.
yes, yes. So, well, the answer is, because I had to think about the question for a second, because I was just trying to think, because you know when it doesn't feel right, and you
Mm.
know when they do. The answer is yes. You can change any belief, really. You
Yeah.
can change your good beliefs if you wanted to change them to a bad one. I don't know why you'd want to do that, because you'd have to
No.
check your ecology and make sure it's aligned with yourself. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how, like, a lot of the people I work with, or even some people who I've heard incredible stories of, getting themselves to a point where it just shifts. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. But yeah,
Mhm.
the quick answer is absolutely. You can change beliefs, because if you couldn't, then there'd be no growth, there'd be no change. There'll be very little of it anyway to get to that
Mm.
point. But I'm sure you've heard of people who have had that breakthrough experience or whatever. They've had that thing happened where suddenly the problem wasn't a problem anymore. They were able to
Yeah.
let it go. You know, and it's true. Like, you don't need a coach. You don't need someone to do that for you. If you want that help, then absolutely get it, and it will really help you. But you don't necessarily need one. You can do it yourself, providing you're willing to do what it takes. So you
Mm.
can do it. And the example I was going to share with you is when I was back in Australia, there was a lady who was part of our group that we'd put together, and she was in her 50s. Incredible lady. I met her at networking and caught up with her for a coffee one day. She had some limiting beliefs, which had come up. It was very much about, like, there was a lot of guilt, but it was very much about taking care of her sister, and leaving home, but leaving her sister there. So she was the one who kind of left home and did her own thing while her sister stayed there, stayed behind. So she had a lot of guilt around that, a lot of limiting beliefs around it as well. But I remember I met her, it was like maybe 6 months prior, a year prior. And then she showed up to one of our meetings, and she's like, all that guilt's gone. I woke up one day and it had disappeared, because she had got herself to that point where she had allowed herself to let it go. So yes, you can absolutely change them. And if you ever feel like you're in a state where you can't change it, that's when it's a good idea to seek further help on it, because there's a blockage in the neurology there, which is stopping you from getting to the root cause of it and discovering what it is, and
Mm.
realizing or learning what you need to learn. Because with every limiting belief that comes up, there's learnings there for
Yeah.
you and you alone, not for anyone else, not what someone tells you that you need to learn, but there's learnings in it. And once you learn what you need to learn from a belief or the negative emotion on an experience, or that's there, once you learn that, then you can let it go.
Mm.
Then you're free to let go. Your unconscious mind just lets that memory go back into your memory banks without having that negative emotion or that charge attached to it anymore. And it just becomes a memory. It doesn't become something that's dictating what's happening now.
Yeah, and you make a really good point, which actually goes back to our previous podcast about, knowing when to get help. And so this is really important, because when you know you want to change something, you want something to shift, or you don't want to have that belief anymore, that's when you say, if you can't do that, if you don't have the skills to do that, or you don't have the know-how to do that, that's when you seek out someone who can help you, because you go, well, I don't want to believe this anymore, but I don't know how to change that belief. And
Mm,
so those of you who are listening, it's really important. Go back to the last podcast and just listen to that. But make sure you're taking notes right now, guys, because this is good stuff. This is really good stuff. And I hope that you are writing down some takeaways that you really want to think about as we go through this. So
one thing I'll quickly elaborate on, because this is something that I have to catch a lot of my clients on, and I'm very aware of it when people say it to me, is if you're trying to ask yourself like what the problem is here or what's going on, or you're realizing that you are limiting yourself. And when you ask the question like, well, what is the problem? If you keep coming up with, I don't know, then that's the time to seek help, because I don't know is an excuse for not going down deep enough to figure it out. And I catch people on this all the time. Anytime someone says to me, or a client or anyone says to me, I don't know, I say something like, oh, I know you don't know, but if you did know, what would you say? Which kind of starts to get them to think a little bit differently. But if there's a blockage there that's strong enough, and every time you keep trying to dig down deep and the I don't know keeps coming up, that means that there's something there that you really need to get past. And if I don't know is the go-to answer, that's when it's really time to seek help, because that's the biggest excuse for not allowing yourself to get deep enough.
Yeah. And I remember, this is actually a funny thing, Nathan, is because I have to use that with my clients all the time to help them to chunk down into their thinking. But you said that to me one day and I'm like, damn it, he's coaching me.
Yeah, I kind of do that. I kind of do that a lot.
And it was awesome. I'm like, damn it.
Yeah, no, people don't really know what to think to that, because that's part of the job, right? I'm not here to be friends with my clients. I'm there to help them get to where they need to be. I actually called a client out of mine recently. I hope we've got time. I'm going to share the story with you as well, because just on Tuesday I was coaching a client over in the US, and it was the most profound coaching session I've ever had, and she had an incredible realization. You know, it was the time where, I don't know, you probably remember yourself, but it's like almost you get to a higher state of consciousness, like you just elevate to that level. That was for her, because she was having a lot of beliefs around self-love. Like she was really struggled with that, thought she'd gotten past it, but it came up again. But I noticed that it was a pattern that she was running now as well. And so she was telling me all these things about self-love and how she wasn't feeling it. A few things with her dad came up. And so, but I had to stop her. I said, look, I'm going to say this to you, and it's probably going to be hard to hear. She's like, okay, go ahead. I was like, I've got a feeling this is just a story. You know, what's the point of the story? What's it trying to protect you of? And she had the biggest realization about like tapping into universal love, which was huge. But her belief was that she doesn't love herself, right? Which came from many, many years ago, like when she was very little, particularly around her father. And it's just funny because I thought she'd gotten to a stage where she had let it go, or she was in the process of it, but she was still running that story. She needed to dig deeper, because she's like, I don't know where it comes from. I was like, well, I don't believe that. What's this doing? What are you trying to protect yourself from? And she's like, well, from true love, like the universal love. I was like, okay, wow. It was just incredible. There's way more to it than that, but it just came up, and I was just like, wow, that's phenomenal. But this is the power of like a belief, right? And particularly if you're not allowing yourself to get to the root of it, like it can take time, but if you're not allowing yourself by saying, I don't know, then you're already shooting yourself in the foot, right? Getting that out of your vocabulary to start off with is the first step, because once you can get past that, then you're like, right, well, I do know, and I'm willing to do what it takes, or I'm willing to at least start to explore it.
And you touched on like the power that beliefs have over you. And I think that, you know, there's the positive and the negative to that, right? So if you have these strong beliefs, they can have a power over you. And then if you have these negative beliefs, they have a different power over you. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, let's look at a positive one. If you've got a belief that I can do anything I want, what can you do? Anything, right? Or what about, no matter what happens, I'm always going to be resilient, and I've got the resources to get out of it or actually thrive from it. That's a pretty damn empowering belief to have, right?
Yeah.
What about, no matter what I do, I'm going to be happy, or I'm going to enjoy myself. No matter what life throws at me, I'm going to enjoy myself. That's a really, really empowering belief, right? And so if that's the case, no matter what happens, it could be a loss of a family member. It could be a circumstance, particularly with how the world is at the moment. A lot of people out there who have had an incredible shift in their life without their doing, like it's just happened for them, like losing their job, being unemployed, not having money coming in, that security and safety is gone. If you had a belief when that happened, that no matter what happens, I'm going to be amazing, or I'm going to thrive and everything's going to be great, then what does that mean? It doesn't matter what life throws at you. It doesn't matter what happens, right? And this is because this is the not the trick, but the next step after you realize where you're limiting yourself is to install something on top of that. So let go of the belief, like do the work and we figure out what's going on there so you can get to a point where you let it go. But once that's gone, you got to remember there's it's almost like a black hole. It's like there's nothing there. So what do? You've got to pack it with something good, something empowering that's for you and you alone. Because if you try and put someone else's belief, like I'm always going to be successful, that may not be what you need. So the belief has to come from you. And you ask yourself, like once all the old limiting beliefs are gone, you ask yourself, what do I want to believe instead? Well, I want to believe that anything's possible for me. Beautiful. Because that's come from you now. And it's got way more power than any type of belief that I could tell you that you should have in inverted commas. So that is the power of both of them. And that's what can happen and what can't happen based on what's going on inside your own neurology.
And so something you just said there, let me just grab hold of that, because you said that, that when you have that belief that you can do anything, right? So I come across a lot of people who need that reinforcement from other people, right? And to me, that is such a shame. Well, shame is the wrong word. It's such it just saddens me that,
empowering.
Yeah, because people, if they can see what they can do for themselves, no one needs to tell you you're a good coach. You've got to believe that yourself. No one needs to tell me I'm a good coach or a trainer or whatever. I've got to be able to believe that myself, because then it can't be taken away. It's all about me and what I believe. And I think that there's a lot of people that want to get that external validation, which can be taken away.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're talking about self-empowerment, and that the last podcast we did about the journey out is in. Prior to that, the journey out is in. That was a couple of weeks ago. So that's essentially what we're talking about, right? Because if you've got a belief where you need people to tell you that you've done a good job. First of all, one thing I would check there, because what may be a limiting belief for you might be good for the person. This is what we always have to check. But if that is actually working for them, then okay, that's fine. If they're producing the results and they're happy and it's not a problem, that's fine. Because we always have to double check if it's a problem or not. But if it is a problem where they're constantly searching for recognition, they need that justification or validation from other people, then it's very disempowering, because it's putting your power over to someone else, right? So no matter what you do, if you're not happy with what you're doing, you have to wait for someone else to tell you that it was a good job, then that seems like a decent problem. Like if you're not getting the results that you want, or the only way you can get the results you want is from someone else telling you, then we have to look at that. Well, what's the belief around it? Where does that come from? What's the negative emotion? Because what is the belief there? It's like, I only do well if people are around. Well, what happens if people aren't around? What happens if no one's there to tell you? Does that mean you're not going to do well? What would happen if you did do well and there was no one around? But like, what's the emotion that's driving it? It's like fear of being alone, perhaps, fear of not being enough, anything like that. This is where we'd start to get quite deep, because the beliefs are there and the actions are the surface level. But once we start digging deep enough, we'll realize the true fears and the true things which are driving it all. Because I talk about the emotions a lot, because if you think of like the emotion in the middle and the beliefs kind of come off it like that, so you knock out the emotion, the beliefs fall away as well.
Yeah, I like that analogy. And
does that answer the question? I know that's a lot to unpack.
Well, no, but it does answer it. And I think that as a coach, how important is it for you to be able to really elicit people's beliefs, really get to what their beliefs really are? Because I know that at times I have clients who say what they think their beliefs are, but actually they're not really their beliefs.
It's vital.
Family and generational beliefs.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good topic. So, in answer to the question first, it's vital, absolutely vital. So, the way I operate anyway, it's like the first conversation I have with someone outside of like the general working out if the next step is to have an actual proper conversation, because I usually meet people on Messenger. So the next step, as you know, it's a 2-hour coaching session. I don't jump on a call for 15 minutes. I don't do chats or anything like that. I don't meet for coffee. If we're going to speak, it's a 2-hour deep coaching session. Whether it turns into business or not, I'm not really concerned with that. If the conversation goes that way, then sure, then I'll explore the conversation. But the whole point is to have that session and serve the person in that moment. But the beliefs are in there, and that's what that session is about. If we end up doing a actual coaching package, I always do a personal breakthrough session, which is anywhere from 4 to 8 hours on top of that 2 hours as well, because that first 2 hours is more kind of discovering the limitations, digging down deep enough to find out or help them realize what's going on, then start getting clear about what they actually want, because that's quite a deep process as well. It's not like, yeah, I want $1 million. It's like, well, why? Why do you want it? What's that going to bring? Because this is when we start getting to things like legacy and fulfillment and stuff like that, because there's always going to be something deeper in the positive aspect as well. But then after that, the process is like doing a personal breakthrough session, because I need to help them let go of those beliefs, let go of the negative emotions, integrate anything that's not making them whole at the moment, and do whatever I need to do to help them. It's almost like wiping the slate clean. It's like, let go of all this stuff, like the baggage, the heavy baggage that people carry around. It's like letting all that stuff go. So now we can just focus on the future. And if anything else comes up, because there's always going to be another layer down there, if anything else comes up, then we can take care of it as we go. But after that, it's just more like possibility. So letting go of all the negativity, all the stuff that's not working. And that's more about positivity after that. So to answer your question, it's vital. Discovering those beliefs are vital, because if we can't figure out that, then the next steps or the actions they take aren't going to be as powerful or what they need, because we haven't done the pre-work. Do you know what I mean? It's like that's the foundational work.
Yeah. And so as you're talking, I'm thinking about, because I've done a lot of work, and I know that I used to think that you just do the work and then it's done. I now have a reality check of you continue to do the work. But so some of the work that I had to do some years ago, I really struggled with, because the situation that I had experienced for a lot of years, I knew it wasn't right, but I actually didn't have an example of what it should look like, right? And that was really hard for me. So, when you talk about, let's say we're talking about, a positive experience somewhere. I'm trying not to get too personal here. Positive experience somewhere. You've got that experience. Now, you might not have had that experience every time, but you have something, you have like a benchmark, right? So for this problem that I had to work through, my belief was so strong because I didn't have an experience or a picture of the opposite, but I knew that there was more. I knew there was something different. And I'm sure the listeners can resonate with this, because you might have, if you've experienced negative relationships, and it could be family, it could be intimate relationships, and you've never experienced positive relationships, how do you know what it should look like? How do you know what you should be seeking? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's a big challenge a lot of people have, particularly when they first start thinking about what they want. Because most of the time people will talk for hours or days or weeks about everything that's going wrong in their life. And at the end, it's like, all right, I'm exhausted. Why don't you tell me what you want? And they're like, I've got no idea. Because they're so used to looking at what's not working, right? Based on like previous experience, beliefs, and things like that. And that's part of it. I always say a very simple question. If you look at what you don't want for a second, this is what I don't want. Okay, so why don't you just tell me the opposite? What's the opposite of it, right? And that's it. Well, you start looking at the opposite, it starts to open up the possibility of what's there. It's like, well, if I don't have the money I want, cool. So what do you want? Well, I want money. Great. How much money? I don't know. I know you don't know. Why don't you tell me what you would say if you did know? 20 grand a month? Okay, cool. Why do you want that? Right? So it starts to open up, because you can't think one thought without naturally thinking the next thought from there.
So you're really going into, and there's probably a better term for this, you're really going into possibility of, even though you don't really know what that looks like, because not having money to go in with money, like you would know what money feels like, right? But when you haven't had an experience, let's say you never know what it's like to go onto a roller coaster, that you've got a fear of roller coasters, but you don't actually know what it's like to go on one, right? How do you then shift that to go to get someone to go, well, I want to go on it?
Yeah. So first, I'll dig deeper. Is it a fear of roller coasters, or is it something else? right? Because if it's
Mm.
if it's something else, but it's just coming out as roller coasters, and so be it.
Mm.
But if you find out it's because of an experience that happened younger,
Yeah.
then that's where the belief comes from, right? Let's say I'm scared of
Mm.
roller coasters. Okay, where did that come from? Where did that belief come from? Well, it came from when I was younger. I was watching TV and I saw someone fell and died from it, or there was an accident, and it was tragic.
Mm.
I was like, okay, right. And so reframing from there is one of the best ways to do it, because reframing is a really good way to start shifting or loosening the problem and takes
Yeah.
the power off it. Because if you can start to see the possibilities, because like, okay, right, so that's one example of a roller coaster tragedy that happened. How many roller coasters do you think are operating on a daily basis throughout the world? It's like, well,
Yeah.
1,000, right? Excellent. And so out of those thousands, the chances of one of them having the same type of experience is pretty low, right? Yeah, it
Mm.
is. Cool. And so same with plane crashes and things like that. And you can compare the two and say, where there's so many planes flying throughout the air every single day, every single second, what's the
Mm.
chance of one of them going down? Like if they were scared of the plane crashing, right? So you'd reframe it and then compare it to examples to start shifting to possibility. If they can't
Yeah.
get themselves to a point where it's crippling, they still can't do it, then deeper work needs to happen. But only if it's a problem. Like if they don't want to ride a roller coaster and they're happy not to do it, that's fine, right? That's perfectly fine.
Yeah. Look, someone asked me one time, where did I get my belief around snakes? And I said, because they said, why are you so afraid of snakes? I'm like, because they kill you. My
Yeah,
belief is snakes kill you. I don't want to change that belief. And I
that's
think
fine.
that's
Yeah.
a really important thing to understand for our listeners is, there's beliefs that you want to change, but there are also beliefs that you may not want to change.
Yeah. So the two words are inappropriate and unwarranted. So it's like an
Mm.
inappropriate and unwarranted
Ah,
reaction or an inappropriate, unwarranted fear. So if you've got a fear of laptops, for example,
yep.
for some reason, I'm just looking at a laptop. Right? I've never heard anyone have a fear of a laptop, but you got a fear of laptop. Okay. That seems like it's inappropriate and unwarranted because there's not really anything to be scared of in that
Yep.
respect. But if you've got a fear of snakes, for example, which are a deadly animal, particularly in Australia, then that's fair enough. Okay, that's completely fair.
Mm.
Are you planning on handling snakes? Are you planning on going to a place that requires you to be around snakes? No. Okay, cool. So it's pretty warranted and appropriate
Yeah.
fear to have. Wouldn't you
I
agree?
love that. I love that.
Yeah,
Inappropriate and unwarranted. Yeah.
it's a really good way to look at it. But then just kind of going back to what you said in regards to when like a belief feels right as well, that's when you start looking at, is this appropriate and is it warranted? And because, and this is something we haven't touched on yet, but if we think about beliefs and the origin of your own beliefs is they are passed down to us, particularly when you start looking at like religious beliefs. So if you grow up in
Hmm.
a particularly Christian house, then there's a good chance you're going to be a Christian, possibly for your whole life. You may get to a point where maybe you don't want to do that anymore, or you have some type of realization that maybe that's not working for you anymore. And so, but you have to think like, is this belief inappropriate and warranted? Is it serving me or is it not? But then we have to start looking at other beliefs. And this is where we start getting quite deep on it, is the belief that there's a possible health risk which runs in the family. So for example, imagine you grew up in a family where it says every male member of the family has a heart attack at 40.
Mm. Yeah.
So if you know that growing up your whole life, so what do you think happens? Every time maybe someone has a heart attack who never did anything about that belief, is it a result of a poor lifestyle? Or if they were healthy and they have a heart attack at 40, perhaps maybe that belief had something to do with it. And this starts getting quite deep, and this is definitely for a podcast some other time. But if you think about it, if that's the type of belief, because we know how powerful our minds are, and we
Yeah.
know that what we can manifest. And if you've done enough research and exploring into it, you know that a lot of stress and anxiety that happens inside the body, when we say like physical symptoms due to stress, well, where does stress come from? Stress comes from the mind. What's
Mm.
happening in the mind that's creating the stress, right? Because we're not, like, stress is not a natural thing for us. We don't need stress unless it's in an environment that requires us to have a stress response to get us out of there, like flight or fight. But if we've got a belief inside our head that every male member of the family has a heart attack at 40, what do you think is going
Mm.
to happen closer to the date of the 40th? Or do you think that maybe that belief would contribute to an unhealthy lifestyle, which would then contribute to the chance of having a heart attack at 40 become increased, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to look at that. As you're growing up, 20 years old, could you stop for a second and believe, well, if every member of the family or every male member of the family has a heart attack at 40, that doesn't sit well with me because I don't want to have that. And so
Hmm.
perhaps then you could make that change, because you just, that belief for me would be like inappropriate, very unwarranted, because maybe that's not what I want in my life. So now I'm going to do everything I can to avoid that. I'm going to live healthier. I'm going to look after myself, and I'm going to prove that that is a poor belief to have, or that doesn't always happen to everyone in our family.
Yeah, yeah. And that's so very true. And it was the beginning of this year where I had to write out for my family, I had to write out the history of cancer on my mum's side. And that was just like devastating to me.
Wow.
And I'm just like, wow, no, I mean, we had to know because there were things going on, but I had to sit there with my parents and go, okay, what did such and such die of? What did such and such die of? And I went, well, I'm not doing this,
Yeah.
and I've made different choices for a very long time. So, but yeah, our beliefs really drive.
Everything.
Yeah, yeah,
Everything. Yeah.
yeah.
It's bringing them into the conscious awareness and actually knowing what we believe. That's when we can start to look at them in a different way and start to decide if that's something that we want to continue or not. Like,
Mm.
yeah, we come from a family of plumbers. We're always going to be plumbers. Are they happy plumbers? Or are they miserable plumbers? Like, what if one day someone grows up and they're like, you know what, I don't want to do that. Well, that's just what we do. This is what we do in our family. Cool. So what I want doesn't matter anymore, right?
Mm.
Suddenly, a life of unhappiness is pursued instead of going for the thing that you want instead. So they drive everything, Donna.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because I'm pretty much the only person in my family who has been an entrepreneur and run their own business. And um, my mum, God love her, her language has always been, Donna, if you work that hard, you're going to have a heart attack, and that was her belief, and she doesn't say it anymore, and I don't work as hard anymore, but I'm still an entrepreneur. That's just the way my brain works. And none of our family had actually gone to year 12. And here I now have one of my daughters who graduated year 12, and now my niece is graduating year 12, which is outside of the norm for any of our family on both my mum and my dad's side.
Yeah. Yeah. So you break it, right?
Shifting the beliefs.
Yeah, that's right. Because you imagine what would happen if you hadn't made that realization in your own life and you kept working the way you were working. Would that have increased the chances of having a heart attack?
Yeah, possibly. But
Yeah.
like I just this stuff excites me so much that I go like, we don't need a baby book when we have children. We need a beliefs book when we have
Yeah.
children.
Yeah.
Because if we understand this and we understand the 0 to 7 and the 8 to was it 8 to 21?
8 to 14.
8 to 14, and then 14 to 21,
21, yeah.
15 to 21. So yeah, and I had to, when I was actually first coaching with someone, I had to go back to all of those stages and remember all of the great things that happened in those times. And that was a massive task, because you had to
Yeah.
write things that happened that weren't so good and things that happened that were good. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, wow. So, how has, as a coach, how has NLP helped you really become, a really different kind of coach? Not all coaches work with NLP, which is a shame because it's a very powerful
Yeah.
tool.
Um, so look, it's at the very beginning, NLP was one of the main go-tos for the type of tools I would utilize when I was working with a client. There's a lot of the techniques in it which I don't use because a lot of them can be quite therapy driven as well, and particularly these days because I'm online. Some of the work like anchoring and things like that, which is you physically have to touch someone, doesn't really have the same type of response if you try and do it online. But for me, NLP, I think the main thing that stood out was like just not buying into client stories. Because I know there are coaches out there or people who prefer to be more empathetic and take on what the client's saying. For me, NLP wasn't about like why the client's doing it. It's about how. It's about the process that's going on inside their head and if it's serving them or not. And so when I've tied that in with timeline therapy, because timeline therapy is my go-to for shifting negative emotions and limiting beliefs. It's a huge part of like NLP from the Tad James company. So that has been the main thing that's helped me shift because I don't know, I find particularly these days, I'm less inclined to buy into what a client is telling me because it doesn't serve them. It doesn't
Mm,
serve them if I sit here and just tap them on the shoulder and say, oh, that's okay, we'll figure it out. It's like, no, there's a reason they're here. There's a reason they hired me. And it's not to be that person that is just tapping them on the shoulder, tell them it's okay. It's about helping them work out what's going on in a very uncomfortable way sometimes and getting
mm,
really deep, because no one else in their life will be doing that for them. And NLP has been one of those things which has just given me those tools to do it, particularly reframing. Reframing is very powerful,
yeah.
because it's someone will tell me something and automatically I can just find a way to help them see that differently that's going to
Mm.
serve them, because that's what they need. And that starts to shift the problem to uncover what's really going on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Reframing something I've used even in my training, because you have students who have limiting beliefs about their ability to learn,
Yeah.
and so to me that's been very powerful, and I personally love EFT tapping for
Yeah. I've heard a
changing.
lot about that recently.
Yeah, I've used EFT since my youngest was a baby, and she's now 19 next month. It's just such a powerful tool.
Yeah. Really, ever since a baby.
Yep.
Right.
When
Okay.
when she was a baby, I would tap her for anything, and ear infections or being distressed or whatever. It was just always helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a friend of mine who's been studying kinesiology, and even another friend of mine who went and saw a kinesiologist, talking about some of the same. It's similar to, I wouldn't say similar, but they've got a technique where they really help someone get to the root cause of a problem simply by the way their arms are, and then whether one arm goes down when they hit a certain problem in the neurology.
Mm.
But it's, and I think we've spoken about this before, but it's like finding that thing that works. That's the main thing. There's so many things out there to do, as long as you find something that's going to work for you to help you get to where you need to be. But the first step is always taking that first step.
Yeah, yeah. And again, one of the things that we do on the resilience movement is we are here to help people find tools that work for them. And,
Yeah.
creating that tool bag that they can tap in to any time they need help is what we're trying to do. I've always
Yeah.
used that analogy of, what have you got in that tool bag that you can use?
Yeah. And are you prepared to open it right now when you're feeling the way you're feeling?
Yeah, 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 very much, because that's part of being brave, right?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Jumping in there. So, what would be the last thing that you would like to tell our listeners about their beliefs?
To tell them about that, the one thing I would say is that be prepared to listen to yourself. One of the biggest challenges most people have outside of their belief is not having that relationship with their unconscious mind. And
Yeah.
so that voice inside them that gives them an idea, they usually shut it down pretty quickly. Most of the time, that's just giving you some really good advice as to which way to go. And so if you're looking at your beliefs and you're using some of the things which we've spoken about, like asking the question, or what belief do I have right now, or what am I limiting myself on, and what's driving that right now? Listening to the answer, right?
Yeah.
This is part about developing that relationship with yourself. We talked about meditation before, but things that are going to help you to stop and just focus on yourself rather than being distracted and running around all the time and being busy, or not giving yourself that time, but giving yourself that time to stop, ask yourself a couple of questions and
Mm,
listen to the answer that comes up. That's the advice I would give, because that answer is what you need right
mm.
now.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and if you're prepared to listen to the answer and take it on board and learn what you need to learn, the shifts will start to happen, and the changes will start to be made with inside yourself.
What would you say is a question if someone's, they know they're not right, and they could be anxious or angry or whatever it is? What's a simple question that they should ask themselves?
What belief is driving this feeling right now? Or something like, what emotion is driving this? And then once the answer comes up, so whatever the belief is, um, I'm always stressed when X happens or something like that, whatever the belief is. When that comes up, the question then is, well, where does that come from?
Mm,
Okay, well, where does that come from? And then suddenly a memory or something will pop up, or a number will come up. It'll be like 5, and it's like age 5. Like, right, what do I need to learn now?
yeah.
What do I need to learn from this? What can this anxiety give me right now? What can I learn from this anxiety? Well,
Yeah.
learns you need to take time for yourself, or whatever the answer is. And that's what I mean by listening. So there are three very powerful questions you can ask yourself. It's like, what am I feeling right now? Or what's the belief that's fueling this right now? Where does that come from? What do I need to learn? And listen to the answer that comes up, write it down if need be, and then just allow whatever happens to happen within inside yourself. And then say thank you to yourself and then continue on.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nathan. This has been awesome. Like I said in my notes in the last podcast, I go away from these feeling just really invigorated and excited, and I look forward to the next one.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I know this one was a big one in particular. There's a lot to unpack, so I'd recommend you listeners go back and listen to it a couple of times. Of course, any questions, send any questions through, because there will be a few that pop up. Because the big question is, well, how can I change my beliefs, or what do I need to do?
Yeah.
Once again, the answer is inside yourself if you ask the question. But no, this has been really good. Thank you so much for having me on again.
No problem at all. And we'll see Nathan next week. I'll see him. You'll hear him next week in the series number 4 of 5. Oh my God, that means we're coming to the end. But so thank you again for tuning into the Resilience Movement podcast. Until next time. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening, guys.